This is Inside Town Hall, a behind-the-scenes look at city government and the issues affecting you and your family.
Thank you for joining us for Inside Town Hall. I'm your host, Madeline Shields. Coming up on the program, we meet City Councilor Greg Neitzert. He's representing the Northwest District. We'll hear about his priorities and what he expects on the Sioux Falls City Council. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Dr. Banworth with Falls Community Health. At the beginning of this school year, I just wanted to remind all parents and students of the importance of updating those vaccines. South Dakota law actually requires that all students have updated immunizations prior to entry into school. Vaccines help to protect us against potentially life-threatening infections that are spread from person to person. These include meningitis, pneumonia, chickenpox, influenza, and many more harmful diseases. Contact your primary care physician to learn more about the vaccines required for school and get your child immunized against potentially life-threatening diseases.
The Northwest District in Sioux Falls has a new representative. Joining me for Inside Town Hall is City Councilor Greg Neitzert. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about who you are and why you ran for City Council.
Well, I was born in Huron, South Dakota. I moved to Sioux Falls when I was one. My parents did. I grew up on the east side of Sioux Falls, over near Pioneer Park and Lord B. Anderson. Grew up in Sioux Falls, went to elementary school here. Then we moved out to Garrettson, South Dakota. So I grew up in a small town for junior high and high school, and went to college, Southwest Minnesota State University. Got a degree in computer science. Moved to the Twin Cities after I graduated. Got married to my wife, who I met in college, actually, in Marshall. Lived in the Twin Cities for about 5 years. It was interesting, but decided it was just too big, and we wanted to move back closer to home, and we ended up back here in Sioux Falls, and we've been here for the last 10 years or so, and we've just been loving it. So,
talk a little bit about running for City Council, and you represent now the Northwest District. It's a huge district. We were talking about a little bit with land area. Talk a little bit about, what it was like to run and, representing a large area in Sioux Falls.
Sure. I've always been very interested in politics. I've been following politics since I was probably in junior high, kind of a political junkie. And so I started watching council meetings when we moved back here in 2005, and then I started attending council meetings in 2010 or so. Mm-hmm. And so I had been attending council meetings in person for 5 or 6 years, and I just decided that I had the knowledge and I really wanted to try to represent the average citizen, which I think I am. And so that's why I decided to run. I just wanted to represent citizens who just aren't there on a weekly basis, and I just felt it was the right time.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about what your priorities are. What do you want to see happen on your time on the City Council? What's the first thing you'd like to see?
Well, as I told the voters, I wanted to bring a fiscally conservative mindset to city government. I wanted to keep control of debt, which we definitely have to just keep working on. We're paying it down aggressively right now, which is very encouraging. I want to rebuild our roads and just keep working on those. We're working on those aggressively. Quality of life that everyone can afford, parks, pools, libraries. One of the things I heard a lot from constituents, particularly in my district, in kind of the outer areas, is that they'd like to see another outdoor pool. I'd like to see that someday, another outdoor pool in the Northwest District. So.
Okay. Where specifically? Any areas that you would like to see? Because the indoor pool now, we talked a little bit about before we started rolling, is in your district, the new indoor pool as well.
Yes, it would be, as we grow farther to the northwest, most likely. We have Keene Park at 41st and Sertoma, and that, by the way, would be scheduled, I think, for a replacement somewhere down the road, making it a larger outdoor aquatic center. And that would benefit my district as well, because it's literally a few blocks from the edge of my district. So it would be farther to the north and the west, and as you mentioned, the indoor pool is on the edge of my district, but it's it's to the southeast edge of my district, essentially. So,
Is Terrace Park Pool in your area?
no, it is just on the other side of my district. That would be in the central district.
So when you're talking about an outdoor pool, it might be somewhere way north. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because we are growing pretty quickly to the north and the west, and it would make sense somewhere on the north and the west. And I'm sure the Parks Department is looking at it. They're always identifying new areas that they could site parks and pools, and so that would be in their long-range plan. We do need to get the indoor pool up and running, see how it operates, what it's going to cost, live with it for a while. So it's not going to happen in the next few years, but I would sure like to see at least plans for it by the time I'm done on the council.
And you talked a little bit about quality of life issues. What else would you like to see in the city of Sioux Falls that maybe we don't have now, or an extension of?
Well, I would just like to see aggressive expansion of parks, libraries, and bike trails. Those would probably be my three biggest. We have plenty, obviously, but as we continue to grow and sprawl, that we continue to put them close to where people live and play. And aggressive bike trail expansion. A lot of our district has been waiting for many years. We've been planning to do a bike trail expansion that would go north from 12th Street. And it would go up and it would wrap around kind of the southeast Votech area, and then wrap over towards the arena and the event center. And so that would be it, kind of to get those connectors, to get the people kind of in the outlying areas into the main hub, that main 20-mile loop, so that you could get onto the bike trail.
Do you think some of those quality of life issues will bring more young families to Sioux Falls? And since we have a low unemployment rate, we're looking for workers, is that kind of where you're headed toward?
Yeah, absolutely. Quality of life and public safety. Those are probably the two biggest things I think of, besides jobs, of course. I mean, you come here for a job. You've got to have a job. But you need to feel safe, and you need to have places to play while you're not working. And as I walked the district, with, as you mentioned, such a large district, I had a very diverse set of comments that I heard, and it really depended on where you lived. Those that were closer to the core, what I heard about was crime. They were concerned about, they had a perception and that there was crime rising. Some of them had had some personal experience with it. And so that was their concern. So we just need to be very aggressive about that. As we grow, unfortunately, crime will increase. And then when you talk to the citizens kind of in the more outlying areas, that's when you started to hear more about some of that quality of life issue, which was more of, when am I going to get a pool near me? When am I going to get another library? When are you going to rebuild or expand my road? Things like that, where we don't have quite so much crime in kind of the outer fringes, and if we do, it's not necessarily as much of the violent crime. So it's very interesting to hear what people had to say, and it really was very parochial based on kind of the area of the district.
Sure. And as you talk about that, how do you prevent that crime? What would you like to see in the near future to either prevent crime or stop what's going on right now?
Well, the first thing is hiring more police officers, and we're looking to hire 2 more this coming year. And we have to be very aggressive with that and budget for whatever the police department needs. If they say they need police officers, we need to make it happen. More patrols. And to the city's credit, we've been very aggressive. And so I think we're doing what we can, but we just have to stay ahead of it and not let it start to get ahead of us, essentially, with the city growing as quickly as it is. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Okay, you talked a little bit about aggressively rebuilding and repairing roads. What areas do you see that could use some help right now?
Well, one thing I've been lobbying for, and I've had a lot of citizens talk about, is T. Ellis Road. T. Ellis Road is in rough shape, and we do need to rebuild that and expand it. That is scheduled for 2018. It's scheduled to be engineered in 2017. They would turn that into a 4-lane arterial with a median in the middle, just like you might see on 41st Street between Sertoma and T. Ellis. So it would be a beautiful expansion. It's really nearing capacity. Now that would be from 26th to 41st Street.
Okay.
12th to 26th Street does not have the capacity yet that we need to do that full build out. But in the next several years, we're going to need to do something in the interim, a mill and overlay or something to extend the life of that road until it's time to widen it. And so in neighborhood roads, there's some roads in my district which have very salty soils, and so and people do a lot of pumping with their sump pumps, which is very damaging to roads. And so rebuilding neighborhood roads, I did see some roads that really needed some help. We are aggressively repairing them, though. That's important to note. There's a lot of roads that are getting mills and overlays in the next few months, and that have gotten them in the last few months in my district. And so we're very excited to see that.
Let's talk a little bit about shaped places. You have some experience with the zoning ordinances. Talk a little bit about why is that important to you, about how the city does its zoning.
Well, I was appointed to the Zoning Board of Adjustment in 2010 by Mayor Huther. I served 2 terms on the Board of Adjustment. I vacated because I was elected to the City Council, of course. And so I got quite an intimate knowledge with the zoning ordinance, and I saw how it affected people, and also going to council meetings, seeing how the zoning ordinance affects people. Zoning is very important because it protects neighborhoods, it protects your homes, it protects you from encroachment of commercial uses. But on the same token, there's also property rights. I mean, you need to be able to develop your property. We don't need onerous regulations, but we need to make sure that we don't, damage somebody else's property from what we do. And Shaped Places was adopted in 2013, and because it was referred to the voters, it actually didn't go into effect until 2014 after the election. It brought in a lot of great changes, a lot of built-in protections, but it's not perfect. There's things that we can improve with Shaped Places. And I'm seeing it on the council, and I saw it before I got on the council. There are certain developments when you have existing neighborhoods and you have a large-scale commercial expansion, or apartments, for example, that really get people concerned. And I think that there's more that we can do to help to protect neighbors and also to give them more say. And so I think there's some tweaks that we can make. It's a wonderful ordinance, but it was 300 pages. We all knew it wasn't going to be perfect. It would need improvements and some fixes along the way, and I think we should be open to that.
Well, if people aren't familiar what Shaped Places is, it was a comprehensive zoning plan that would it simplify the way businesses and homes were zoned in the city of Sioux Falls? Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes, our last zoning ordinance was in 1983. This was a complete rewrite of the zoning ordinance, essentially to get more updated with the times, because the old zoning ordinance had quite a few issues being written 30 years ago. It really didn't even account for things like mixed uses. I mean, where you have commercial developments on the first floor and you have a residential on upper floors, and being able to mix things together. And there were some issues over the years that citizens had brought up and staff had seen, where there was a lot of conditional use permit hearings that were completely unnecessary. For example, you'd have to get a conditional use permit, which required money and several months' time to put a church in a commercial zone, and nobody objected to that. But then on the other hand, there were certain things that kept happening over and over that brought up concerns for citizens, and so they were able to put things into that zoning ordinance that were built in. For example, separation distances from sensitive uses. Sensitive uses are parks and residential homes and daycares. So there's built-in protections that everybody has the same rules and they have to follow them, and we don't even have to have a hearing.
Okay. It says here there are 60,000 parcels in the city that were rezoned because there were something wrong or something different. Do you see any of that continuing? I mean, are there still areas that need to be rezoned?
Yes. Now, to be clear, when we rewrote the zoning ordinance, we had all new zoning districts. So every parcel in the city was essentially rezoned or redesignated. And when you rezone 60,000 parcels, there's just going to be some human error. And so some were just set incorrectly. For example, there might have been one zone for a single family home and it was a duplex. And so it's zoned incorrectly. So we just need to fix it. And in the cases where it was just a simple error and it was correct before Shaped Places, but now it's incorrect, we're bringing forward what's called a city-initiated rezone, which is essentially the city brings it forward, the citizen is not charged, there's no charge, free of charge, and then we will rezone it for them. And I just want to make sure that when we do that, we bring it forward as quickly as possible, because what citizens typically find is that they come in to get a building permit, to add a deck or do something else. And at that point, that's when it is identified that it is zoned incorrectly. And usually nobody notices until then. And by that time, they are ready to do their project. So I just like to see them brought forward as quickly as possible. We have been kind of putting them in batches to do them every 6 months or so. I'd like to just see them brought forward on an as-need basis each month as they're needed. But I'm sure there's more out there, and we'll fix them as we go.
Okay. Well, at this time, we're going to take a break. We are visiting with our new city councilor, Greg Neitzert. We'll be back in just a moment.
30 seconds. It's the amount of time this public service announcement will last, and it's the amount of time on your commute that you may be slowed down in a cone zone. These city employees are working hard, and all they ask in return are two simple things.
Number 1, stay alert.
Number 2, slow down.
They all want to get home to their families too, and your patience is greatly appreciated. When you see amber flashing lights or orange traffic cones, stay alert and slow down.
Welcome back to Inside Town Hall. We are visiting with City Councilor Greg Neitzer. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the ambulance service in the City of Sioux Falls. There have been some changes in the past year or two. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. A little over a year ago, we contracted a new ambulance provider named Paramedics Plus to be our ambulance provider. We do not provide ambulance service ourselves in the city. We contract out a private company. We put out what's called an RFP, which is a request for proposal, where companies were allowed to submit essentially bids to run our ambulance service. And we had a set of criteria that they had to follow and agree to, the most important being that they had to adhere to certain response times. They have to get to calls more than 90% of the time within a certain time frame, and the time frames are different depending on whether it's level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 being the most serious call, level 2 is the essentially medium, and level 3 is the least severe call. But response times is what we measure our provider based on.
And you went on a ride-along, is that correct?
I did.
Were you concerned about the response times, or?
Well, there had been some stories in the media about something called level 0, and I can explain what that means. And so, and we had a contract renewal coming up. We are required per the contract to increase our rates by 3% each year, which accounts for essentially medical inflation and other inflationary costs, and they do give pay raises to their employees. And so I thought it was a perfect time to do a ride-along, and I did do one. I did a full 12-hour shift on a Friday night from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and it was a wonderful experience, and I learned a lot.
Okay. And are you satisfied with the ambulance service that is providing service to the City of Sioux Falls?
Yes, I am. I did have concerns, and there's always things that we can improve, and one thing that you learn is that the ambulance industry, it's a very volatile industry. It's a very stressful job. I mean, you're seeing a lot of, really some bad things at times, and the pay isn't great. It's a tough industry, but they're doing the best that they can. And I did have concerns about level 0, and at level 0 meaning that there's no ambulances that are currently not taking a call. We have at any given time 4 to 5 ambulances, sometimes 3, it depends on the time of day, that are throughout the city. And all level 0 means is that all of them are busy with a call. And so there had been stories in the media that there had been a level 0 issue and that somebody was told that an ambulance wasn't available. And one thing I learned is that level 0 in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem. It's about the response times. You may call 911 and there may not be an ambulance available when you put in that call, but an ambulance may free up a minute later. And then it's immediately dispatched to your call, and it may get to your call in, let's say, 4 minutes, well within the response time required. So what really matters is response times. And the other big thing that people need to understand is that our service isn't just an ambulance service. It's an entire emergency medical service that is provided by the police and the fire and the ambulance. So when you put in a 911 call, the police and the fire department are going to be on the way immediately. Many times the fire department, who are trained EMS professionals, are going to be there within 2 minutes. So even if the ambulance takes, let's say, 5 or 7 minutes to get there, there are people there that are assisting you very, very quickly. And the ambulance will come. I do not want people to be afraid to call 911 for fear that an ambulance will not come. There will be an ambulance ready for you. And Paramedics Plus is hitting their response times well over 90% of the time. They're getting there on time.
So for many of us that might have grown up in a small town, usually we were used to the volunteer fire department and the volunteer ambulance service coming to the rescue. Of course, in a city the size of Sioux Falls, that's not the case. How often do you have to choose an ambulance service? How often do they have to go through the guidelines and submit an RFP?
It's several years. Maybe every 5 to 10 years. It depends on which way the contract is structured, where they want to open it up and look for another provider. Something interesting about our new service is that they have what's called posts. Under the old service, they would stay at a station, and you may remember having seen those stations under rural metro or previous provider. Now we have what's called posts. They stay at a particular location throughout town. So as you're driving through the city, you might see an ambulance sitting in a gas station. And you may wonder why they're sitting in a gas station. It's because they actively deploy those ambulances throughout the city so that there's always an ambulance somewhere throughout the city, so that when you put in a 911 call, there's one closer to you. And I saw that in action. We were able to get to calls faster because we were constantly being moved around. And at Metro 911, you will see on their screens, they can see where all of the ambulances are at any given time. So they can dispatch the one closest to you. So while they do sit in trucks, and they do sit in them for several hours versus sitting, at an office, for example, they will tell you that it does save lives. And that is the way the industry is moving, is to what's called active deployments. So they have posts throughout town so that there's one close to you at any given time.
Okay, let's move on to Project Trim. That is trimming trees in the boulevards of Sioux Falls. Do you have some concern about how that program is working?
I do. We do need to trim trees in the city of Sioux Falls, and I don't have a problem necessarily with the citizens doing it, but I think we can improve the customer service. So what Project Trim is there are neighborhoods that are identified each year where the city goes through, and they'll drive through, and they'll essentially measure the trees to see if they meet compliance. And the branches have to be a certain distance above the street, depending on the classification of the street, and above the sidewalk, so that pedestrians can safely move and that vehicles can safely move. And so the city goes through each year to different neighborhoods so that they essentially cover the whole city in about a 5-year cycle. And trees that they identify that are a problem, they will go back to the office at the city, and they'll send letters out to property owners who they identified trees that were not in compliance. The problem is, and I have gotten one of these letters, is that the letter says we identified that there are trees not in compliance, but it doesn't identify which trees are out of compliance. And that creates a lot of confusion because sometimes it's not really obvious what trees are not in compliance. I had the issue myself where I frankly couldn't figure out which tree was out of compliance. And so it makes it very difficult. And then staff has to go back and they have to check trees again. Sometimes they'll go back a few times. And I've heard a lot of comments from homeowners who've been very concerned about this. I think we can make it more customer service friendly. And I did go to many of the homes that were assessed recently, and these are beautiful homes with beautiful properties. These are not troublesome properties. These are people doing the best that they can. So I'm hoping we can just change the program and maybe mark the tree, maybe with a dissolving paint of some sort. Just something that would identify this is the tree that we need you to trim. Something as simple as that we could implement very easily, and I think it would go a long way towards providing good customer service. So I don't have a problem with trimming trees. I think we can let's figure out how that we serve the citizens just a little bit better.
Do you think it is the citizens' responsibility to get those trees trimmed, or would you like to see the city do that for them?
I would be okay with having the citizens do it because it is their properties, and we do require them to do things like mow the lawn and the boulevard. We could look at possibly having the city do it, but we have to be very honest. It would add an increased cost, and we'd have to decide whether we would want to do that because something else would have to give. It would cost more money. So I think a good place to meet in the middle would be simply to do a better job of identifying which trees that we would like them to trim. I think that would be a good compromise.
Okay, and then let's move on to public input at city council meetings. You're in favor of people coming up and being able to talk to the city council. You're newly elected. Why is that important that you think the citizens should have that ability to come in and talk to the city council?
Well, I guess I'm in the unique position that I've been on both sides of the fence. Having gone to city council meetings for several years, I used public input. And it is really the one place where the average citizen can talk to their elected officials in a public forum and bring something to our attention. And we have the bully pulpit essentially as being elected officials. We can get in front of the camera. We're sitting up at the dais, so we can talk. is about as much as we want. But this is a one chance for citizens to really talk to us. And I think it's really important that we be open to listening to citizen feedback. We really need to be open to that. And sometimes we're going to hear things that we don't want to hear. I don't think it's helpful at all if all we hear is, how wonderful we are. We need to be willing to take criticism. And so as long as there's not abusive language and there aren't ad hominems, I'm perfectly willing to listen to criticism. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And I don't want to restrict it at all. I don't want to change it. There's always talk about it. And the price of democracy is there are going to be some people that are going to say things that maybe aren't true or are inaccurate. And I think that's just something we have to accept.
There is an ability right now, though. People can go to the city council and they can speak to the city council. Is that right?
Absolutely. We have public input. Yep.
Okay.
You can speak for up to 5 minutes on a topic that is not on the agenda for a second reading. And you can talk about virtually anything. And it's wonderful because you'll have citizens who will come in and they'll bring up a subject that maybe we had no idea about. And it brings something to our attention. And so we'll do what we can to look into it. And many times these are citizens who have never been to a council meeting or any public meeting.
Are
Ever.
you hoping to expand this or leave it as it is?
I don't think it needs to be expanded. I think we just need to leave it essentially as it is. Because right now it's open-ended. It's 5 minutes to talk about any subject you would like. It's at the beginning of the meeting, directly after the invocation and the approval of the consent agenda. And so I would just like to leave it exactly as it is. Sometimes there's some ideas that maybe we should move it to the back of the meeting, or we should, reduce the time. And sometimes that comes because the public input at times can be rather lengthy. We might have an hour of public input in a meeting, and maybe 30 minutes of the actual meeting. But public input is one of my favorite parts of a meeting because we just get to hear from the citizens and hear what they care about.
Okay, and we are just about out of time. So if someone wants to get a hold of you, tell us how they can reach you.
Sure, they can call me at 367-8109, and that will ring directly to my cell phone. I'm happy to take calls. If I can't pick up, please leave a message and I will get back to you. You can also email me at gneitzer@siouxfalls.org, and if you go to the siouxfalls.org website and you scroll down, you'll see our pictures. You can click on my picture and you will see both of those contact informations.
All right, well, thank you for joining us for Inside Town Hall. That's our time, and you can go to siouxfalls.org for all the latest news and information surrounding the city of Sioux Falls. Thanks for watching.